The Occult Technology of Power. The initiation of the son of a finance capitalist into the arcane secrets of economic and political power. Who the hell writes a book like this? Well, for fuck's sake, there's no author. Well, it's a book. Underworld Amusements. Isn't that interesting? Ho, the Golden Stallion here with you for a little Wednesday Q&A. Boy, I'll tell you, a book I do want to mention briefly is, oh boy, was I coming off loud there on my handy-dandy Kingston HyperX, Kingston HyperX Cloud 2 headset. I've always used HyperX products forever. Kingston RAM, like back when at a couple of tech companies I've worked at. Those were always that was kind of my go-to for RAM, was getting Kingston. It just always ended up being quality. And then whenever I started building gaming rigs and they released the HyperX, which was pretty unique for the dual channel RAM at the time, I would always jump on that. And now HyperX has become pretty much a gaming brand. I guess I just kind of stick with it. So, but nothing against like Crucial or others. Like I use Crucial whenever I need to do things on cheap but still have a whole lot of balls. It certainly works very well for that. But anyway, a book I do want to mention, I talked about last week, or a couple weeks ago, I talked about a new translation of The Ego in Its Own. And of course, the new translation was perhaps I'll say, more properly titled The Unique in Its Property, of course, by Max Stirner. And the new translation of that was done by Wolfie Landstreicher. And he actually also did a translation of Stirner's Critics, which this book is a little harder to find because he did this about 5 years ago maybe. But very well done. What I've read of it so far, I think I like his translation of Stirner's Critics more than I'm appreciating his angle, shall we say, with The Unique in Its Property. But that's a whole other conversation for another time, something that I'll review. Something that I plan on getting into after Porkfest is a lot of book reviews. I do want to... I've been reading a ton, and I know a lot of people really dig, I share a lot of the rarer books. I'm a collector. I love, it's the only thing I really care about collecting. And I don't mind if I convert them to ebooks. And eventually I plan on doing that when I can afford to, with the many with quite a few that I have. I love rare books. I love books that are completely out of print, that are sensational, in that they talk about perhaps wild things, even if I don't agree with them or believe them, kind of like The Mana Machine and books like that, which sell actually, like books like The Mana Machine will sell for hundreds, if not thousands of dollars around the world. I'm honored to have a copy of it that a Sovereign Tech listener actually provided me with. So I will be doing a review of that soon, hopefully. And I have others, but I'm so obsessed with rare books. Or things that are out of print. Something that was really popular in the 90s. And we're going to get into some tech, folks. Don't worry. We've got a lot of great tech stuff to talk about in this episode. But one of the things I loved about the 90s was they see, the concept of multimedia. Now, the concept of multimedia, meaning multiple forms of media for, say, one topic, one franchise, one movie, or something like that, right? That concept had been around since the 70s. You could pick up the first time I ever remember really seeing multimedia, as a phrase, or the oldest time I've seen it used, was actually on the novelization for the original Battlestar Galactica, which that would have been 1978 or 79 when that book came out. And it says it right on the book, multimedia. They knew that they're coming at you from all sides. And of course, Battlestar Galactica was a multimedia event. The original Battlestar Galactica, the new one, just crap. In fact, holy shit. All right, hold on. Quick side tangent here. IO9 finally got the word from Ron Moore himself. You remember at the beginning of every episode of Battlestar Galactica how it said, and the Cylons, are going against their creators and they had a plan? He came out and said, we had no plan. There was no plan. We were making it up, all the way as we went along. And here's the problem with that, folks. Now, they've kind of admitted that somewhat in the past, like with the Cylon character of Daniel, which never really existed. Here's the problem with that, is that you were being sold on this show as if there was a plan. It's false fucking advertising. It's false marketing. It's bullshit. There was no like grand plan, because like you're watching perhaps all the more intently, or you're rewatching episodes because you're like, oh, what's the hint that's going to lead into next week or something like this, when they had no plan. They were making it up as they went along, and now they finally fucking admitted it. Oh, it was so good to be vindicated in that, because I've said that so many times. I told people, I said, that show was so fucking disorganized. People say it's better than Babylon 5. Up your fucking ass. Not a chance. Babylon 5 had a plan. That was a fucking plan, baby. Oh, that was a plan so hard they had to, they were recording like the finale seasons ahead of time because they didn't know if they'd be able to finish the show, but they wanted to make sure the plan for the show actually came to fucking fruition. That's how you do television, baby. Well, that's how you do television when you're claiming that you have story arcs. I mean, this whole thing, if you have story arcs, okay, have story arcs that maybe go more than a year. It was such false advertising. Anyway, I'm sorry. So the good version of Battlestar Galactica, or should I say the great version of Battlestar Galactica, that being the one from 1979, that was a multimedia event, because you had the Marvel Comics, you had the novelizations, which there were sequel novelizations as well. You had in Macy's. Yeah, the department store in Macy's, they sold a clothing line, not of like a black t-shirt with a viper on it, even though I'd love to wear one of those right now, but of like, based upon the styles that like the people wore on the planet Caprica, on the colony of Caprica, and on the Galactica, itself, and in the colonies and all that. I mean, like they were effectively selling cosplay in Macy's in 1979. That's multimedia for you, baby. So this concept of multimedia, not again, not really new at all. So anyway, multimedia in the 90s. This was the thing. In the 90s, like, they really took that whole concept of multimedia. I mean, and I don't know what it was. Like, they would really put money behind it, because, I mean, they would still do what I'm about to describe, but like with Battlestar Galactica, a lot of the initial multimedia was like a novelization of Saga of Star World, right? So it wasn't something original. I mean, you still had to pay the author, but it wasn't necessarily something original. The Marvel Comics originally were just, like comic book versions of some of the episodes, and of course the first one, the most popular, Saga of Star World. As to where in the 90s, suddenly they would still do the novelizations of things, but then they would start to write, more independent stuff. Yeah, they do independent stuff in the 70s and 80s too. I'm well aware of that. Like even the show Buck Rogers, what is it, Man on Beta? I have a copy of that. That's like a book that came out in the 80s that was like based off of kind of an unfinished script that they never used for season 1. Not to be confused with the new that Draconia trilogy that's out on Amazon right now for Buck Rogers, which I love it. But anyway, yeah, so it seemed like it all kind of went on steroids, and not just that they would be willing to release material, like extra stories in novel form or in comic book form or stuff like this, but that they do it for just about anything. Like one of my favorite examples is the video game, one of my favorite video games of all time, that being Primal Rage, which is a fighting game with these they look like ancient creatures, but really it takes place in the far future of Earth, now spelled with a U. They released the novelization because there was going to be a second game of Primal Rage. Never came out. I mean, you can actually go and if you look online, even if you type in on Google Images, you can type in Primal Rage sequel, and you'll find kind of unfinished demo work for the game. It was going to be really, really interesting. But they released even though Sega never came out with the game, a book was released that told the story of what happens in the second Primal Rage game. And it's a very sexy book, and I mean that. Like, it is an adult fucking book. It was phenomenal. One of my favorite books of all time, not a cheap thing to get your hands on. You're talking about a very small paperback book from the 90s that'll probably run you anywhere between, I think the lowest I've ever seen it might be around $35 to $150. But I love this stuff that came out in the 90s. I mean, they released so much shit. Like, there'd be a bunch of Darkman books or Space Above and Beyond books, or you have all the Sequest books, and all. I mean, they would release everything for this shit, and they'd keep the stories kind of flowing and going, and they'd put their money down really on great authors. kind of John Vornholt, some others, to be able to put this stuff together. And I just thought that was so precious. Not real, like I said, the concept of multimedia, not a new thing, but in the 90s, like so many other things, everything was just taken to extreme, and like just over the top. And boy, do I love that shit. And I love collecting books from the 90s. It might be the era that I collect some of the most books. And you'd think, well, how could books from then be rare, or why would they be out of print? Oh, yes, they fucking are. By a long shot. I mean, tons and tons, hundreds, thousands, perhaps even, potentially millions of titles, or at least hundreds of thousands of titles, from the 90s that are just pure magic are gone. Or you can get them, but you're going to pay a pretty good price, and they're well out of print, and there's probably never going to be any interest in that again. I'll tell you something I call bullshit on. This is actually from the aughts, but it's something that also had this kind of multimedia experience. Was Gene Roddenberry's Andromeda. Now, of course, this was made posthumously after Gene Roddenberry died, based upon some kind of spec script of some sort. Had Kevin Sorbo helming it. I actually enjoyed the hell out of the show. I thought it was pretty cool. Like, they had the Nietzscheans, right, and the entire alien race based upon the Ubermensch. It was just really, really interesting stuff, in my opinion. I've never met anybody that takes that show seriously and that enjoyed that show. I thought it was sexy. I thought it had a lot going for it. And the funniest fuck thing is, and I think this is going to end up becoming a trend in the future. Yes, we're going to get into the tech. I'm sorry. Don't mind my geekiness for a few minutes. I noticed that, what is it? San Diego, was it Comic-Con HQ? I think it's Comic-Con HQ. San Diego Comic-Con now has like their own online network, sort of like a Netflix style thing with their own shows and all that. Like I think Collider has a show on there and some others. And now they're starting to pick up, older shows, it seems, older TV shows, genre shows, science fiction shows, fantasy shows, whatever, to put on the network. And the first one I think they picked up was Gene Roddenberry's Andromeda. And this was just a couple months ago. And I was blown the fuck away, because they were talking about it like that show was the goddamn second coming. And when I got that, I wanted to find somebody to email at Comic-Con HQ. I almost got in touch with John Campea and said, John, because John Campea, I know he has some stroke in with Comic-Con. I was going to say, John, what are you people doing? Who are you bullshitting here? Nobody likes that show except me. Nobody's into this shit. And you're selling it. You're going to make a joke. Honestly, I almost felt bad for that network, because I'm like, who's going to take you seriously after you put this out there and you talk about it like, woo, we got this show. That's really exciting. Nobody's going to take you fucking seriously. You're crazy. So, I almost felt bad for them. As much as I want Andromeda to be out there, and you are seeing it, like Babylon 5, we were talking about Babylon 5 there a few minutes ago. Babylon 5, it's on Go90 now, and you can watch it totally for free on Verizon's network. By the way, we might talk a little bit about this in episode 230 of Sovereign Tech. The Verizon deal for buying out Yahoo for $4.5 billion went through. And I talked to, when they first announced that they were talking about doing it, I said way back then, and that was probably, a year ago, maybe a little more. I said then that, what this is about Verizon creating an entire ecosystem, just like Facebook and Google and Apple and Microsoft have. Okay, we're going back to the days of AOL, CompuServe, Prodigy, go down the list. That's what's happening here. Okay, that's why they're willing to put down $4.5 billion, because they are creating an entire online ecosystem that you don't have to leave. You don't have to go to the rest of the internet. You can just watch Babylon 5 on Go90, and Satan bless you if you do. And I mean that. that show needs a watching. Okay, and whatever else they have going on. Just all kinds of wild shit. That I think they have in mind. Now they own Tumblr. You get that? Verizon owns not like a major social network like Facebook, but a pretty major social network. There's obvious reasons why to own that. In fact, I find it interesting. I've noticed a lot of different promotions, a lot of different organizations, a lot of different shows, whatever else. Suddenly now they're all promoting their Tumblr page again. I guarantee you that's because they knew ahead of time. Verizon was telling them, you're going to start fucking advertising on Tumblr because we own it now. Even though the deal hadn't officially, the official word hadn't gone through yet. I think that's what that was about. So, interesting times, put it that way. Very, very interesting times. Anyway, let's get into some of the questions here. So I want to start this off with two things. One is, well, I want to start off with a response. I believe it was last week that we talked about MaidSafe, and I think I talked about Dash a little bit. Which, little quick blockchain news that I want you to be aware of. This is not really on the DL, but speaking of Dash, so there is an altcoin out there, think of it what you will, that is called Zencash. Now they're just calling it Zen. But here's the thing, here's kind of the inside scoop. Okay, it's based on Zcash, which is very exciting. It's based on zero knowledge proofs, which is open source, so they can go ahead and do that. That's fine and dandy. Great. Okay. Zencash recently, apparently their lead developer, just like walked and thrashed everything, like messed with all of their social media accounts, their site, and all this different stuff. Keep that on the DL, okay? But just so you know, well, you don't have to keep it on the DL. It's not like people don't know about it. But in any case, the Zencash now, they're kind of rebranding and they're trying to go forward, and now they're just calling themselves Zen. But their idea, I think is well, I mean, it's not unwelcome. It's interesting in that they are trying to dashify, which I can't believe that's a term, but they are trying to dashify Zcash effectively. Okay, like they're trying to do Zcash in the way of Dash. So if you're a fan of what Dash has in mind, kind of with some of their, I don't want to say centralization, but some of their more unique properties of kind of their social structure, shall we say, of Dash, Zencash, or Zen in this case, I think it's like ZenSystem.io, might be something you're interested in. But be aware that they just had one hell of a problem strike. So, and I think I mentioned Zencash. I think when Paige Peterson was on, we mentioned Zencash before. Still have to have a bit of a deeper conversation about Zcash. I might end up having that in a couple weeks. Actually, while I'm at PorkFest, that conversation might happen, and it'll get released to the Sovereign Tech, listeners proper. So, so to everybody, not just the patrons. But anyway. Yeah, I was talking about MaidSafe, and I got a message, and I want to read the message and just kind of respond, have a little response to it. And that is, let's see, I listened to the episode of the Q&A of you mentioning MaidSafe in the notes. I generally skip the Q&A episodes, but since I'm a MaidSafe supporter, I was curious to find out what you had to say about it. It was through the interview you held with David Irvine that I found out about Sovereign Tech, and that interview really inspired me to get involved with the project and to invest in their placeholder coin, of course that being MaidSafe coin, right? Reading on. Now I have to admit that I'm also disappointed with where the project is right now. Like many others, I hope that we'd be in a later alpha stage or perhaps beta by now. This is not the case, and I understand that it is hard for people to keep faith in a successful completion of this project, especially when other projects in the space are succeeding or taking bigger steps towards completion. Nevertheless, I was really disappointed in the way you handled this issue. You suggested that perhaps switching to Rust may have been a stall tactic. That perhaps is running out of funds, or that perhaps MaidSafe is running out of funds, and perhaps the team may not be up to it. That's a lot of ifs, and I'd expect you to reach out to MaidSafe and ask them about this, especially since you mentioned you quote-unquote love these guys, which Stallion Breaking In, I most certainly do, and had them on your show quite a few times. Anyway, the link you added to the notes is quite old, and even though this guy made some valid points, the way he presented them and behaved himself didn't suggest he had honest intentions. Also, there have been test networks with user-run vaults a few months ago. These networks were quite stable, but someone found a way to mess with them, which forced MaidSafe to implement certain functionality sooner than anticipated. These past few months have been hard for the team, but there seems to be a light at the end of the tunnel. Now, I'm not saying all is well in MaidSafe land, but I don't think you have given this question the attention you could have given it. I would appreciate if you did, and perhaps you could invite David or Nick on your main episode to ask them those hard questions. All the best. And of course, I'll leave the person anonymous. That's a totally fair critique to bring up. And I appreciate. Well, first off, obviously, I appreciate your patronage, and I appreciate your support of MaidSafe, and I appreciate you, sending that message to me to let me know about that, or how you feel about that. So yeah. bottom line is I will redress the MaidSafe issue in the future, and I just want you to know that. And if there's anybody else that maybe had a similar feeling to what this emailer had to say, I will work on this, and we'll see exactly what we can make happen. So yeah, I mean, and the person shared similar concerns to what I had. Like things really, it feels like maybe things should be further along, etc. Yeah, I mean, just on the forums and some other areas, I mean, there's just feelings that, or there's hunches, senses. That I have, and if I didn't explain last week well enough that I was basing things on hunches and senses, that's then that's a failure on my part. But yeah, just this hunch that something just feels really, really off. But anyway, I will, this is a project that I really do care about, that I really do want to come into fruition, like badly. A lot of people do, that I know. And so, so if I can help make it happen, but I'll see about having that interview. I'm just going to say here, like, I am not going to pull punches. I love Nick. I love David Irvine. I mean, like, there's a picture of me and David Irvine. Like, I mean, it's one of my favorite pictures of all time because I think he's such a great guy, and I think he has such a great mind and just brilliant ideas, and I think, well, it's going to be an interview, but I mean, they're going to have to agree that I'm not going to pull any punches, and I'll set that up, and we'll make that happen. It probably won't be certainly won't be in the next couple weeks, but I can definitely get that happening. So anyway, moving on from that, I did mention the Zencash that I wanted to bring up quickly. Let's see. So, well, I wanted to address that just because I want you to know, look, I listen to you guys. Like, if I don't always reply to every message or every post that gets made, even on Patreon, and I try really hard, I just want you to know I'm really listening to you and what you've got to say. And if you have, like, fair criticisms, I mean, that wasn't hate mail at all. Like, a lot of times I get, like, full-on hate mail. Those I don't pay much heed to, but stuff like that, yeah, okay. You're a patron. You want to hear about this? You want me to redress it? I will. Absolutely. So, anyway, okay, let's move on. So I got an interesting email that someone said just the other day. They run a Windows XP machine, which glory to you and your house. You are one gutsy fella. But they said, miracle of miracles, Windows Update was sending them updates. They said, whoa my, what the hell is this? Well, shocker of shockers, and look, okay, yeah, shocker of shockers, yes, Microsoft did officially send out updates. There's nothing weird going on here. I mean, it's weird that they're sending out updates for a system that hasn't been supported since 2014, but there's nothing inherently weird here. But I just want to stop for a second, okay? Look, I'm not really knocking Windows XP, okay? I have said countless times that Windows XP may go down in the future seriously as being considered one of the greatest operating systems of all time, if not the greatest operating system of all time. It was the world dominant operating system, just like ever. Because, I mean, even, especially if you count Windows XP embedded, it's fucking everywhere. Or it was fucking everywhere. That's why WannaCry was so serious. And that's actually what the patches were all about, was to fix WannaCry, because there's just so many systems, particularly using like Windows XP embedded. I mean, you just think about all the ATMs and all this stuff. And WannaCry, that ransomware was just so serious. I mean, yeah, that they had to do it, And this speaks to a lot of things. I mean, there's a lot I could really say about this, particularly towards warnings, with IoT. When Internet of Things products are being made by the little companies, Microsoft can spend the time, Microsoft has the pull to be able to support, I mean, and it's, in many ways, it's what they're really, why people still use Microsoft, because they support things from, 20, 30 years ago. Okay. Fortunately, they have the resources, overall, that's the best term to use, just resources, to be able to push out, updates, serious updates to solve, WannaCry and some other security patches. I'm not praising, Microsoft necessarily for that. I'm just saying that think twice about some kind of, device that is smart, or IoT, that's, Internet of Targets, that isn't made by a giant company that is, I mean, part of the reason that Microsoft can do that with XP, right, is because or with Windows in general, is because Microsoft has been here for 40 years. You know what I mean? A lot of these little companies, and I'm not talking about Chinese companies. There's American companies that are just, they're just as fucking bad. That are coming out with all their new Internet of Things connected device, or it's some Kickstarter product or some bullshit like this. Do you think that company is going to be around in 20 years? And what if it's like your garage door lock or something like that you've been counting on, and then some nonsense happens with some kind of IoT crack, and then you're screwed? Yeah, you're screwed. I mean, like, it kind of speaks, like, you almost want to tip the hat just a little bit to Microsoft, saying, thank you for at least still being here to fucking make sure that, when somebody's getting a surgery, that, their Windows XP embedded thing that's helping out with, device that's helping out with the surgery, doesn't kill them. I mean, it's really like, I mean, we talked about WannaCry and Sovereign Tech. I mean, it was that serious. I mean, it didn't, fortunately, there was quick response to it. A lot of people were jumping on board with it and everything. But shit, I mean, I guess you could sort of say, like, it's chicken and the egg, because, if you didn't have a company like Microsoft, you couldn't have solved WannaCry so quickly, but then if you didn't have everything running stuff by Microsoft, WannaCry couldn't have really been a problem. So it's, depends on how you want to look at that situation, right? But the bottom line is that, yes, they did push out patches just in the past week for Windows XP. I know some people want to crack the joke that, oh, well, holy shit, just let XP die already, and like really kind of quietly force people to update. Some people, and I mentioned this when we talked about WannaCry, some people had the conspiracy theory that WannaCry was actually created by Microsoft to get people to update all their devices and to sell new Windows 10 embedded devices. Well, I would hope that them pushing out, that them breaking all the rules, and 3 years later finally pushing out, a fucking security update, that really Microsoft wasn't behind this. I really hope that puts that whole thing to bed. But yeah, and I've said this many times, and, listener, I understand that some people have really nice servers or a computer that's doing something very special, all nice set up, that would take a ton of fucking work to buy a new computer to do it, or to upgrade to a new operating system and have to, do you even know if the hardware that you're running is going to be interoperable with the operating system you want to put on there? I understand that. But I'll say this once, I say it again. Look, the best thing that people can do is run Linux or BSD. Don't confuse me on that, all right? That is my de facto answer for everything. But if you're in the Windows ecosystem for whatever reason, the software, you're a gamer, whatever, get on Windows 10 already, okay? I mean, I get it if you have this machine that's doing something special. Yeah, I understand why you're not on XP. But everybody else, if you're just running this regular machine or whatever, if you're on 8 or if you're on 7 or whatever, get on Windows 10 already. Like, it's just do things for yourself, and there's plenty of reasons to do it for yourself, and we might actually talk about that in a second in our next question. But everybody else, for everybody else's sake, get on Windows 10. That way, because WannaCry didn't affect Windows 10 at all. Because it had been patched like 2 months previous before the big release from the shadow brokers. So anyway, that's my take. That's there you go. So you're not crazy. Microsoft did push that out, but I kind of applaud them for it. Because they said countless times, no, Windows XP is dead, and well, here they're still pushing it. So anyway, okay, let's see, next question here. What is the best way to download files without acquiring any malware, or at least minimize your chances of getting malware? Okay, this is a great question. And there used to be really simple, nice answers for this, but no longer. And I mean, there kind of are answers to it, but it's sort of changing the way you do things entirely. Now, if you're saying that you're going to get malware, it's a good bet that you're referencing Windows. Not to say that, Mac OS or Linux or BSD doesn't get malware as well, including from downloads of software. But I think it's a safe guess that you're talking about Windows, but I'll address I'll address everything, including mobile, a bit with this question. So right now, I mean, the simplest answer for this, okay, is that to download files and whatever else. I mean, right now, like the safest thing you can do would, on Windows, if you're using Windows 10 and you're not back on Windows XP, the safest thing to do is to use UWP, UWP apps, the Universal Windows Platform. Like Microsoft Edge, some other things, like all of those, each UWP app is in its own sandbox. Okay, so what one app does not affect the rest of the system. Okay, so like if you're concerned about downloading a malicious app of some kind, which is the worst thing that could potentially happen, is that you double click on an exe that is some kind of malware, a virus or whatever. Using UWP guarantees that that's not going to happen. I really think that there's a reason, like Windows 10S, which we've talked about on Sovereign Tech Prime, which is the version of Windows 10, and really it's Windows 10 Pro. Just you can only install software from the Windows Store. Okay, you can only install UWP apps. I really think this is going to end up taking over quite a bit. I could be wrong about that. For a lot of power users, obviously they're not going to run with it. But I think 2, 3, 4 years down the line, I think you're going to see UWP finally come into fruition, because I mean, when shit like WannaCry, I mean, all it takes is a few more of these kind of terrible situations to happen. And Microsoft, just needs to put it out there saying, look, if you're using a UWP app, look, if you're using Windows 10S, this wouldn't be happening to you, And so I think that's going to be a thing. So if we're talking about on Windows, okay, and we're talking about Windows 10, the best thing you can do is try to use apps that are UWP. And honestly, me personally, except for some of the, I guess, more of the creative stuff, which some people would say, if you're not doing creative things, why are you even on a computer? Yeah, I get that, but obviously Chromebooks are a huge deal, so obviously there's lots of people that use computers that aren't doing creative shit. But anyway, a lot of the stuff that I do, there is a great, or at least a very passable, if not great, UWP app for. One of the last things that I really wanted a great UWP app for, honestly, was running IRC, an internet relay chat, right? IRC, there's one called FOO IRC, FOO IRC. I mean, and it's very slick. It runs very nicely. It's not maybe not as full featured as, say, like Merc, or what is it? Adel IRC, that was the one I was using, or like HexChat or something like that. It might be missing a couple features here and there, but for the average person to connect to IRC, oh, it's great. I mean, it really has a lot of very nice features. For podcasts, you have Grover Pro. You have the Instagram UWP app. I mean, shit, like, actually, there's a UWP app for almost every major social network. You don't even really need a web browser, but, Microsoft Edge is a UWP app. That's kind of a nice, and Microsoft Edge can open so many different types of document files, which that is one of the concerning things, right, that you're downloading. Like, say you download an EPUB. Say you go to a torrent site or something. We'll talk about torrents, too. Say you go to a torrent site and you download an EPUB file, right? An EPUB is just a zip file. So it could potentially be a roll of the dice, because who knows what you're unpacking when you open up that zip file. Depending if you're using, say, the wrong software or something like this. This is a problem with PDFs forever, is that people were putting active content in PDFs to where you could get malware just through opening a PDF file in Adobe Acrobat. And that's why for a long, long time I've said don't use Adobe Acrobat. Okay, sometimes, like, for signing features and whatever, you may have to use it, even though a lot of web browser built-in PDF readers can actually do that now. But like, I've recommended Sumatra. Not that Sumatra is sandboxed, but Sumatra PDF, it can read comic book, CBR, CBZ, comic book files. It can read PDFs. It can read EPUBs, MOBIs. It can read almost any like book format that you throw at it. But because it does so little and it's kind of portable and sits on its own, it's not taking up a bunch of, it's not connected to a bunch of different system resources. When you open things in Sumatra, it's kind of a safer bet. So one of the ways to guarantee that you don't download malware is not to guarantee that you don't download malware, but that malware can't affect your system, right, with the software that you happen to be using. And that's kind of the solution that UWP has. So again, Sumatra is not UWP, but Microsoft Edge, the browser, can read EPUBs now. It can read almost any format you throw at it, and it is a sandboxed and honestly very secure little web browser. So that's a great way to open these things up. So yeah, my point being is that there's a lot of apps. Most of the things that I think people want to do on a computer, you can do with the UWP app. Not counting the creative shit. Like obviously Audacity is not a UWP app, even though there's a good chance that like Adobe would eventually put like a Premiere or oh hell, I can't remember their audio. But anyway, it's a matter because like you have Photoshop Elements on UWP. I could imagine that Adobe will eventually make Elements versions, which are kind of lighter versions, which is what really even a lot of professionals just need. They will be putting those out for for people to use within UWP. So even creatives might be able to get in on the game. But like I was going to say, for a lot of creative types, I mean, like Audacity's not on there. There aren't any really good sound conversion software on there. There isn't. Maybe like Movie Maker's not on there. Like, I mean, I could go down the list of software I know I use, and of course, I mean, we're not even talking about the fact that like Steam, the gaming platform's not on there, and that's a huge hit. But like I said, for most people, just using UWP apps, yeah, I think that gets you along nicely. And in fact, if you have Windows 10s, Microsoft Office can be had right through the through the Windows Store, through the Windows App Store. So because what you used to do to download software, I mean, a couple things. You'd either go directly to the software developer's website and install it from there, or you could go to, there's a bunch of these sites back in I mean, they still exist actually. Like there's download.com, which used to be run by, it might even still be run by CNET, but that's an atrocity. They don't check any of the shit that gets uploaded for malware or anything. I mean, and the installer that when you download software from download.com, the installer that comes with it installs a bunch of, not necessarily malware, depends on how you want to define malware, but it installs a bunch of extra crap on your machine. It's terrible. I mean, it's so bad. Softpedia is another one. I don't necessarily recommend that. There have been others, a whole bunch of these that, I don't trust any of those like website repositories anymore. So your best bet, again, I always recommend using software minimalism. So you want to use as little software as you can. And honestly, if it can be done with UWP in a way good enough for you and you're on a Windows machine, go ahead and do it with the UWP app if you can. Okay, because there's so much extra layers of security there. I'm not saying it's perfect security. I'm just saying it's much better than the stock Win32 setup, even though I love the Win32 setup. Because, I mean, the double-edged sword of that is that, I like having the ability to go to independent developers' websites and download their software. Okay, because that means that, well, I mean, you see it with the Google Play Store. You see it with the Apple App Store. If Apple doesn't like what your app does, goodbye. No one's getting it. Same with Google. Same with any of these guys. They don't like what your app does. If your app, perhaps enables you to do something on your computer or device that they don't want you to do, well, fuck you. You can't download it. So that's why it's important to still have like independent websites that give you access, to software and whatever else. But again, the danger there is that you could go there and you could download it and it could be fucking malware. Windows Defender is actually doing a great job of detecting if installers are a problem. So you can kind of lean on Windows Defender a little bit. So, but there's other, I mean, you could say if you're going to an independent website to download things, the Chrome web browser has some security features, like it kind of has a mini antivirus built into it, and if it thinks an exe or a zip file is potentially dangerous, it will tell you, and you can run with those depending on how safe you think that is. I mean, now, admittedly, Google Chrome gave me a false flag, gave me a false flag, or flagged my games. Years, when my games first came out, Hyperchronius and like Ninja Trek, it flagged it if you got it from my website. Now, I'm obviously not schlepping you anything terrible whatsoever. I'm not sure exactly what flagged it, but now that I have it in game stores and everything, it never is a problem, and nobody has a problem. So, one of the things you can do also is what's called a checksum checking like the MD5 hash, and that's a little complex. You're gonna want to look up on like DuckDuckGo how to check the MD5 hash. Okay, how to go about that. But a good software developer will offer you their MD5 hash, which is this little code, and then you can check to make sure that that what you installed also shares that same hash. That way, you downloaded like genuine software. But that would take a little long to explain how to go about that on here. So you're going to want like a visual guide on how to do that. Another thing is to stick within a trusted network. I'll tell you a great way to download things. Join the Sovereign Tech patron RetroShare, and you can then you have the trust of a fellow patron, and that what you're downloading from them is legit stuff. So that's something else, is to just have like your own little mini network of people that you connect with through software that allows you to download stuff like RetroShare. So that's certainly something to look into. Now, if you're talking about doing this like with torrenting. This is one of the oldest things. I mean, I'll just tell you this: you are going to roll the dice anytime you download a movie, okay, from a torrent site. So if you're not sure, if you're not comfortable with that, you might not want to download movies. Okay, or at least new movies anyway, from torrent sites. Like, that's just kind of the best thing I can say. Now, a way to mitigate that is you could download them, but use software like VLC. Again, this is a software solution. Use VLC, which they do have a UWP app for, by the way. But use VLC because VLC is, whether it's UWP or Win32, or you just install it separately, is kind of self-contained. And so when you try to run a file in it, it doesn't get access to all the codecs built into Windows 10, so it can't really inject malware. Even though we know there was the problem, right, and VLC themselves actually did an update almost instantaneously when they found out that subtitle files could inject, could inject malware onto your system. Running through VLC, and not just VLC, it was true for all kinds of media players. But they responded to that very quickly and fixed the matter. So that's not foolproof, but that's definitely one way. Like something that used to be popular is that people would, back when WMV, that was Windows Media Video, okay, .wmv, that was the video file. Some people still post these, I can't believe it. But never ever download a torrent if it's a WMV. Just don't fucking do it. Okay, the reason being is the reason that they package it as a WMV is it's not exactly WMV. They're putting in a bunch of shit, okay, into the file because WMVs usually automatically, years ago, in older versions of Windows particularly, would open up Windows Media Player. It would get like almost, like it would inject malware. I mean, it was so bad, like the shit that could get spread through a WMV file. Okay, so if you see that something's a WMV, don't fucking download it. Just don't touch it. Nobody should be using those anymore. It's a WMA, which is Windows Media Audio. They tried to come up with their own codecs, and WMA was actually a great codec, an audio codec, compared to MP3. Like, it was far superior, but it just didn't take off for varying reasons. But don't touch that stuff anymore. Because I'm in awe. Like, if I'm ever on Pirate Bay or something, and somebody uploaded WMAs or WMVs, I'm like, are you fucking serious? like you think people aren't going to know what you're doing, but maybe they won't. Because, when you buy albums through the Microsoft, through the Windows Store, which I've done, they sell you MP3s. They don't even sell you WMAs anymore. So pay attention to file types too. That could be potentially dangerous. Be very cautious. I mentioned already Adobe Acrobat. With Adobe products in general, because they are so powerful and they are so kind of backwards running that they backwards compatible, I guess I should say, that clever people could still inject stuff into your system just because you're using Adobe. Now, I'm not talking about like Adobe Photoshop necessarily. I'm saying like PDFs and a lot of these more wider formats that have a lot of capabilities. Like a PDF is a really powerful file format, just is. So. Yeah, so that's it. Another thing, especially if you're going on torrent sites, have your ad blockers on. Please have your ad blockers on, because torrent sites are terrible for that. Even if you have like some of the best ad blockers in the world, like uBlock Origin or something like that, there's still the chance that they will. Like, I go to worldwidetorrents.eu, and it will still, like, somehow some fucking ad on that site, or like on Demonoid, some ad on that site will still end up like no matter where I click, it doesn't matter if I'm clicking in the right spot or not. It's going to take me to another page. It's going to create some kind of problem. Something to watch out for when that happens. If you get what looks like a system message, say with Google Chrome, where it's like that little rectangle, white rectangle at the top, okay? If it's from Google Chrome, like if it's something system and it's not like a fake thing for you to click on that website that's going to, give you some kind of malware, it will actually show up, like the window will show up a little bit above like your bookmarks bar or above your Omni bar where all like your extensions are. It'll show up above kind of where it's a little bit above the page. So pay attention to that. Okay, so those are the tips that I can really think of. I mean, it's kind of a broad question. It was asked on Twitter, so 140 characters doesn't let you ask a whole lot, but there it is. So. Oh yeah, I didn't really talk about mobile or any of the others. Okay, so this is even a problem for Mac. That's why Mac, or one of the reasons, there's other reasons, and they're not so, I don't think they're so benevolent. There's the Mac App Store, which is more of a kind of like the iOS App Store, where it's more of a guaranteed way to make sure what you're installing isn't malicious or something like this. And if you're getting it through iTunes, obviously it's not going to be malicious and all that. So Apple tries to mitigate this whole problem by being the company that offers you everything, and they do all the security checks. And they actually do a great job about that, and with that. So that's one way to make sure you don't get anything malicious, is to stick within Mac's various app stores and software and music stores and movie stores and whatever else, which, they have all of that. With Linux, if you're running Ubuntu, I assume if you're wondering, about making sure you don't get some kind of malware, and if you're using Linux, you're probably using Ubuntu. Ubuntu has its own app store where a lot of that stuff is checked out. And you just install it through the App Store. So just use their App Store. That's really the solution there. Same largely goes true for mobile, where if you really want to be sure, you're going to have to go through the Google Play Store. Not that that's even a guarantee, but you're going to have to go through the Google Play Store, or you're going to have to go, or with iOS, you don't have a choice. You only have the App Store. Now, something I've recommended for years with Android devices is another App Store, which is called F-Droid. Okay. Now understand that to do independent installs of software on an Android device, you have to actually check a box, okay, like in your settings that says allow for third-party software. And it gives you a big warning about that if you do that. Like if you want to run Amazon's like Underground or their app or something, you have to turn on third-party software. But this also allows you to run something called F-Droid, which is a really, really great and very important thing to exist. It's an app repository of all free open source apps, but it is a Wild West. So keep that in mind. Like some of those apps that you download might be a problem. They might be some kind of malware. They might do something you don't like, on your phone. So kind of the ultimate answer that I'm giving you here is to just stick within the various stores. But at the same time, like we really want the freedom to not be under the thumb of these app stores, be it on desktop or mobile or whatever. I hope the other tips were somewhat helpful. I mean, on an Android device, if you're on a mobile device, I wouldn't be recommending, downloading a bunch of wacky shit. You can do torrenting on mobile, certainly, but be very careful with that. Definitely. Yeah, this is a huge subject, but I hope I kind of addressed it here. So, okay, we're 48 minutes. I don't like to go over an hour. Let's see. Here's another cryptocurrency question. Somebody asked me, what do I think about Rootstock for Bitcoin? Now, this is an Rootstock. This has been around it's been developed. I want to say it's been developed since like 2013 or 2014. It's been implementations have kind of existed since 2015, and this was something that started getting talked about when sidechains for Bitcoin were becoming a thing. But the basic idea with Rootstock, or what is shortened to RSK, maybe risk, well, that's kind of fitting because I think it's risky. What this is building, it's kind of a sidechain. It's trying to put in all of the features of Ethereum into Bitcoin. Okay, so the question is, what do I think about this? Now, it has its own coin. You can do merge mining All right, so there's not like you don't have to do a whole lot of on-ramping. People don't have to install like even the miners, the Bitcoin miners, they can bolster Rootstock with practically no effort, because again, when you're mining Bitcoin, because it's merged mining, it means you can mine them both at the same time, same software, etc. So that's a plus going for it. And the thing is, what are my thoughts on it? I mean, it's features that I don't think anybody wants. I don't think anybody needs, and I think that are completely unproven, especially when you look at Ethereum. I mean, Ethereum is really an unproven technology. I've talked about this countless times. And Rootstock in particular would be adding on a sidechain to Bitcoin. It wants to attach to Bitcoin because it wants the network effect, right? It wants the security of the Bitcoin network because so many people are running the Bitcoin network. And I understand that. Okay, but at the same time, when you're adding on sidechains, this is, and it's still to this day, it's yet to be proven whether or not the security of sidechains, jumping off chain, off of the Bitcoin blockchain into a sidechain, and then coming back, that somehow that's a really secure situation, that's a really secure action to do. We don't have 100% yes. I don't even think we have 50% yes to that question. All right. So that's a problem in itself. But also, let's be clear. Let's just talk about Larry. Let's say the sidechain thing gets solved, whatever, and people want to start popping on smart contracts and all that horseshit, onto. And I do think a lot of that's horseshit, depending on what you mean by smart contracts. That's a broad term. Tossing all that onto Rootstock and it's all connected to Bitcoin. Okay, here's the problem. Rootstock is Turing complete. Okay, it's adding a Turing complete language to Bitcoin. Turing complete is the wrong term, and I'll say this. I've said this many times. I'll say it again. It should be Turing vulnerable. Turing complete is not secure. Turing complete is vulnerable. That's why it shouldn't be called Turing complete. It should be called vulnerable. Okay, Turing vulnerable. Reason being is that a system like, and I've also talked about this many times before, and not just me. Other people have. Andreas Antonopoulos have talked about this. That there's a reason that Satoshi had Bitcoin be very limited in its feature set and limited in its programming and what it could do. Those were security features that didn't allow it to do everything like Ethereum can. Okay? So you don't, and my point being is you don't want something that can do everything. You don't want Turing completeness. I mean, and if you want to, here, we were just talking about how to make sure you don't install malicious files. You want to know something that's Turing complete? Font files. You want to know one of the easiest ways to inject malware onto a computer? Font files. Why? Because it's Turing complete. Shit can run anything. So it's Turing vulnerable. Okay? So what do I think about it? I think it's a terrible idea. For all the reasons that Ethereum's a terrible idea, I think that this is a terrible idea. Add on side chains, which I am not sold on yet. And it just doubles down on failure, in my opinion, or at least on unproven technologies. When Bitcoin, in many ways, is very much a proven technology, so why fuck with it that way? As I've said before, this subject's come up a lot of times on the Q&As. I'm not saying Bitcoin can't do more, but just make it a simple implementation like colored coin, which was something that was being, that seems to have gone by the wayside, unfortunately, which is really unfortunate because, there are already wallets getting made that could handle Bitcoin, using colored coin, which colored coin is you effectively label different Bitcoins to represent things other than money. It's a brilliant idea. Very simple. Didn't require it. It could be done, largely in the wallet. I mean, didn't require a whole bunch of changes, to the Bitcoin network or whatever. I mean, there's really no issue here. Things like Rootstock, a lot of these different ideas they're money makers for money's sake. And you can say, what's wrong with that? Fine, I understand your point. What's wrong with that, right? Well, here's the thing, though. But, there's no real utility. Bitcoin has value because it has genuine utility. And so that's what's annoying about it, is there's no utility here. I mean, it's literally just like, here's an analogy, even though, proof by analogy isn't proof. My analogy for this would be the Nook. Yeah, here we go. Okay, the Barnes & Noble Nook. What the hell are you talking about? The Barnes & Noble Nook, all right, the tablet that they released, this would have been in 2011. they sold with that tablet, okay, they put a little like kind of like on cameras, this little, I forget what they call these little divots or whatever, where you could like hook through, say, like a little wrist holder, like a wristband, so that way you can kind of hold the camera on the wrist, and it's just this rope that goes around, and it's attached via a little rope to your to your camera. Well, they did this for these tablets. The thing is, all they did was, it wasn't so that you could have a wristband on. It was just so you could have what they called a charm. And I mean, it was this worthless, these things cost $10 to $30, $40, $50. And it was just this little piece of like cloth that you could attach to your tablet, to your Nook tablet. It was the biggest money-making scheme. I mean, like, it was so fucking stupid. Okay, and that's how I feel like a lot of these projects that want to attach to Bitcoin, that's what they are. They're not really adding any value. They're just trying to create, like a, I don't know, they're just trying to create money out of nothing with this. I mean, and they're not really adding value. So yeah, Rootstock, not a fan. I just don't, I don't want Ethereum. I don't want Ethereum, attached to Bitcoin in any way. And for someone to try and do an independent implementation of that with Bitcoin, no thanks. No thanks. I mean, and are people going to do it anyway? Yeah, probably, I mean, and understand, like, I know some people are going crazy about Ethereum's value, and, you got to grasp this, okay? When you hear about, oh, this company's using Ethereum, this company's using Ethereum, like Microsoft's using Ethereum, blah, 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 blah. No, they're using a Ethereum, okay? They're using, like, the technology, but they're not using Ethereum. Microsoft's not connecting to your Ethereum network where your ETH sits or something. Okay, these banks, they're not using Ethereum. All right, they're using an Ethereum blockchain, but they're using it completely independently. It doesn't connect to you. You're not connecting to Morgan Stanley or whoever the fuck else. You're not connecting to Microsoft with your ETH. It's a completely separate implementation. Okay, you're not going to make any money off of it. You understand? So that's why I keep saying Ethereum, like all these ideas are completely based on speculation, and so many people don't get it because of the way that people like the Ethereum Foundation and others market it. They market it like, yeah, Microsoft's using Ethereum. No, they're not. I mean, yes, they are, but they're not using the big network that you're connected to. They're using something completely different. Oh, man. Reality check, folks. Reality check. Anyway, I appreciate the question about Rootstock. That is something that's, it's still floating around. But remember, it's Turing vulnerable. So ixnay on the hombre with that one. Anyway, let's get on to another question here before we wrap up. And, why don't we make it, let's get back into the geeky shit a little bit, shall we? I'll tell you, one of my most popular Patreon shows that I do every time one thing I've noticed is the Q&As aren't the most popular. Now, the Hangout Q&As are very popular, but the raw Q&As are not the most listened to Patreon episodes. The most listened to Patreon episodes are two. One would be anytime I do the Star Wars updates. Those get downloaded almost 100% on Patreon by my patrons. And then the other are any other like kind of special episode where like I'm talking about history or something like that, which by the way, we still have the user podcast series coming up, and that's going to be Patreon only, of course. And I know a lot of people are excited for that one. So anyway, with Star Wars being one of the more popular ones, I actually did get a question about some of my comments. Or I got some comments about my comments on the recent Star Wars update Patreon episode that I did that I thought had some interesting insights, and that was cool. But there was a question embedded in there saying, I was curious also, what was your overall thought on the EU wipe? And I'll read what they said. I was slightly frustrated when it happened, but I understand why it was done. I think it could have been better managed if they just wiped everything past Jedi, though. Most of the content before that wouldn't interfere with their ability to craft a new post-Jedi storyline, and there's evidence they might be reviving some of it anyways, along with the rumor of the Clone Wars lost episodes bringing in canon, since I think they refer to Vong, the Yuuzhan Vong being in the galaxy during that time period. If you talked about this before, you can just link to that or reply privately if you don't want to take up Q&A time with it, of course. No, I actually want to take up Q&A time with it. I'm always happy to take up time for anything when it comes to Star Wars, baby. Or just geeky shit, science fiction in general and whatever else. But anyway, so we'll talk a little Star Wars here, last few minutes. Yeah, so what did I think of the EU wipe? Well, first off, I'll say this. I think that's a very interesting idea that you propose, listener. The idea of that they could have just posted, or they could have wiped everything post-Jedi, which I mean, I can kind of see because they were starting to weave everything together really tightly, where like events that directly relate and potentially hinder things that would happen after Return of the Jedi. We're getting laid down as canon in the kind of the pre-Jedi material. But it really is a shame because, with the prequel trilogy, I know a lot of people don't dig them, and in fact, this emailer had comments on that. But I know a lot of people didn't dig them so much. But most Star Wars fans actually really liked the novels that came out of especially sort of the more of the Clone Wars novels. I'm thinking of, there was the MedStar ones. There's a bunch of different novels that they had. The Star Wars Republic comic book is one of the most well-received Star Wars series ever. And you get such great stories, like with one of my favorite Jedi characters, that being who also starred in Dark Disciple, that being Quinlan Vos. And of course, he's still a canon character because, well, I mean, for one reason is that he's in Clone Wars, but Dark Disciple is also a canon novel. It's part of the new canon. So yeah, you lose all those great stories with Quinlan Vos. I mean, there's so many stories I could think of that were pre-Jedi that were just tremendous. But yeah, I'm with you. So how do I feel about the EU wipe? At first, I was kind of against it, but then, I did some and what the EU wipe is, for those that don't know. So when Disney bought Star Wars from George Lucas in 2013, when they bought Lucasfilm, I should say more particularly, which, encapsulates Star Wars, they reset the canon in 2013 to where before you had this, what's called the EU, the expanded Star Wars Expanded Universe, EU, and then they created what is, now they call that Legends, and now you have, what they just call it the new canon, I think is generally the term that people use. But really it's the full canon. Like now, because before with the EU, you had, with the Expanded Universe, yeah, the books and comics were kind of canon, but they could contradict themselves a little bit if necessary. Certainly George Lucas had his hand in some of the creation of some of the EU comic books and books, particularly like New Jedi Order. He may have had some hand in. I mean, there's debates into how much he really gave a shit about any of that. But regardless, the rule used to be that, well, the movies first, then maybe, then like the TV series of Clone Wars or whatever, and maybe like the cartoons of, say, the Ewoks cartoon or the Droids cartoon or something like that back from the 80s. And then under that would be like the books and the comics, and then maybe the games would be under that or something. Like it was kind of this multi-tier canon system called the Expanded Universe. As to where now, yes, if a novelization, say, of The Force Awakens says something that contradicts, which it shouldn't, but if it says something that contradicts what you saw in the movie The Force Awakens, you go with what the movie says. Otherwise, across the board, like the book Dark Disciple that I mentioned, is as much canon and taken as seriously, and has to be taken as seriously and into account as much as any of the Star Wars movies or television shows, which I think is really cool. And that's I mean, the reason that I decided, because, yeah, at first I was a little angry about the EU as well, mainly because I felt like these stories were, going to be, they weren't something that I was going to be able to converse with other people about anymore, as treating them as like, okay, this is how the Star Wars universe works. Like, I couldn't talk about Chaz the Empire anymore. I couldn't talk about Crimson Empire anymore. And I know everybody fucking says, and I think this is so stupid, but I get it. But I know everybody says, it's like, well, you can still read them, you can still enjoy them. Yeah, but it's not like I can add it into trying to figure out what's happening in the Star Wars universe anymore. It doesn't hold the same weight. It doesn't mean as much anymore. There's not anything on the line when I read it, as to where when I read, Thrawn, or when I read, the upcoming Phasma book, or Inferno Squad, or when I read Rebel Rising, shit's on the line in the Star Wars universe. Okay, it counts. And so that matters. So I was mad about that. I was also mad, because I read everything. Everything, and for that knowledge to not have a whole lot of meaning anymore, to not have the same amount of meaning, to not be a walking Wikipedia, right, which is the Star Wars encyclopedia, that kind of hurt. That kind of sucked. I mean, I still get to do that because I still read fucking everything that comes out for Star Wars, the comics. I still play the games if they're relevant to the canon or somehow I experience those games or whatever. I still do all of that. But that was really why I was mad about it. It was just because it would have been like, oh, fuck, now I lose my position as like a Star Wars high priest. Which I don't really, because again, I'm still very knowledgeable in everything that's going on, in the Star Wars universe, because I still, consume it all. But all that knowledge just kind of seemed to go to waste. But then, when I was thinking about it, so initially I hated it, but then when I was thinking about it, and I was just like, a lot of this shit needs to go. Yeah, let's do this. Let's clean this up and let's make it work. Now the only real problem here is that there've kind of been some stinkers in the new canon that I've been a little disappointed with, as to where, the irony is that, and this will happen with the new canon as well. For another analogy, so like today, okay, you have today the electric car is becoming a thing. Of course, the electric car could have been a thing, 100 years ago, but that's not what we're here to talk about. So today the electric car is the thing. The sad part about the electric car, I'm not saying I don't want the electric car to exist. That's fine. It can exist. The sad thing about the electric car today is that the internal combustion engine, good old gasoline, has been, so honed, so like developed to near perfection today that, in the miles per gallon you can get with it and everything, it's such a pity that now that technology is being phased out once it gets to this point of near perfection, of just how great that engine can be, right? And the sad part is that just before 2013, like just in 2012, like when Dark Horse, they released a comic book just called Star Wars, and it was going to take place between A New Hope and The Empire Strikes Back. You can go back and read those. Marvel re-released them as Legends. It's some of the best Star Wars stories done, bar none. I mean, it is just top-notch fucking Star Wars storytelling. You're getting that Star Wars feel. Leia's kicking ass. I mean, you've got everything right going on with it. And I felt like, especially when you get into the later Clone Wars novels and all that, like that the Star Wars canon was getting to this, I don't know, it's just getting to this point of perfection. Where things are really starting to come together and things are really making sense, and you were getting tremendous stories because you had this huge tapestry, of 20 years or 30 years of the EU to build on top of, even though a lot of it was shit, and so that was kind of the last fig leaf of mine before finally saying new canon, baby, woo. So yeah, so I didn't like it at first, but then I was just like, yeah, I get it, and actually this needs to happen. And I think we're getting a lot of, I think there's a lot of, it depends on how they treat things, but there's the potential for a lot of past mistakes to really get solved. In particular, Thrawn, let him stay the fuck alive. Okay? There's so many great ideas that were just killed off because, a contract with Bantam said, okay, no, you need to end this character story right here, right now. And it, kind of couldn't go on. And as to where with Lucasfilm, with everything really being done in-house now, I think there's the potential to correct a lot of those mistakes. Like Thrawn could live on. That's just one example. And there's a lot of other things too. You really had a lot, to go on. And I mean, there's times where it's good to rock that clean slate. There's times where I don't like it when it happens, but this is one of those cases where I was like, yeah, this is okay. This is all right. And maybe a lot of people would have felt better. And I don't know how you could do this. But I love what Star Trek did, with the Kelvin timeline, the Abrams movies, where, no, the Prime Universe still exists. It's still a thing, but there's this point where things changed, and now we kind of have this alternate, universe of events to explore. I think that's the right way to do it if you really want to reboot a canon. If you want to completely, come up with a total new canon or something. But I understand why not everybody can do that. In Star Wars, I don't necessarily think that could work. I love the idea. I wish that they kept a lot of the pre-Return of the Jedi stuff as canon, because that would allow Shadows of the Empire to stick around, which is probably my favorite Star Wars story from the expanded universe. I do think, though, another reason is that I think Disney probably somewhere in the next 10 years. That, of course, that's an easy prediction to make. But somewhere in the next 10 years, they're going to bank heavy on like Knights of the Old Republic, like going back 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 years, or even further in the Star Wars universe, going way, way back. And that's an area where the new canon actually was kind of starting to fuck up, even though they were touching on it, but they were still kind of screwing up. So there was this thing called Dawn of the Jedi. In fact, Tim LeBon, who might be kind of a Liberty guy, but anyway, Tim LeBon, who wrote one of the canon Alien novels. Anyway, was it Out of the Shadows? Is that the first one? Anyway, Tim LeBon, he wrote a novel for Dawn of the Jedi. There was a comic book series for Dawn of the Jedi. Here was the weird thing. So this is one of those things where I was like, okay, yes, the canon is finally getting to where, the expanded universe canon is finally getting where it needs to be, because we're going to find out really, because of, where did the Jedi come from? Because Knights of the Old Republic, yeah, you got to see the Jedi 4,000 years ago, but it didn't really tell you the origins of the Jedi. like you didn't get that. And now you were going to get it with Dawn of the Jedi, because it took place like 10,000, like a stupid amount of time ago. From before A New Hope. And the damnedest thing is that, like, from the first issue, so they had, I forget what the name of the comic series was. It was like a 6-issue comic series that Dark Horse was doing for Dawn of the Jedi. And they fucking, like, right in the beginning of it, they tell you this story. There's these mysterious stones that were taking people from all of these different worlds, and effectively saying that they were gathering Force users. And they dropped them all off on this one planet. Okay, this one planet was kind of like a pre-new canon version of like Jeddah or something. I think they actually like called it Jedi, or I forget the exact term that they ran with on it. So like I've just been kind of letting my expanded universe knowledge fall by the wayside now that I have to learn the new canon. But anyway, but here's what was, and then the story goes with how this group on there, and it's like effectively a bunch of gray Jedis. Again, this is 10,000 years before A New Hope, before there are Jedi, before there are Sith, and it's having them. Like, it's a story about them and their training and all this different stuff. But it was like, well, fuck, you didn't explain the origin of anything. You just said there was these mysterious stones that were gathering people from all over the galaxy. What the fuck is that? And so they just created another mystery. Like, they didn't answer any questions at all. They completely dropped the ball. And so that was another area where I'm like, okay, that I thought about, which was should have been the most exciting Star Wars story ever told. It's like, okay, how did the Jedi come into being? You don't get that. You just end up with another mystery, like I said, with these fucking flying, space rocks that aren't asteroids. So I was like thinking about that. I'm like, no, okay, yeah, we can reboot that. That's fine. So as a good idea, I think, as it is to stick with a lot of the kind of the pre-Jedi stuff. There's a lot of pre-Jedi stuff that is also kind of shit, even in the time frame that I think was pretty good, which is the later parts of the expanded universe. So yeah, that's just my thoughts on it. But I totally understand, and I think that's actually not a terrible idea. I think it would have been interesting if there were certain parts of the EU, certain books and whatever else that they said, yeah, I wish, we want to keep that. We want to make sure that that's part of, part of the new canon and everything. That would have been all right. And they still kind of can. They could just redo them, but. Anyway, so that's my thoughts on the EU. Like I said, initially I didn't like it at all. It's like, oh man, but there's such a rich history. There's so much that I've learned. but then I was like, yeah, no, this is the right thing to do. Just like I've said, I don't mind if they ever remake A New Hope. Like, I am so on board with them remaking A New Hope. Don't remake Empire Strikes Back. Don't remake Return of the Jedi. But if you want to remake A New Hope, have what's it, Alden Ehrenreich and whatever playing Han Solo and all that shit. You go right the fuck ahead and you solve that whole problem about Han Solo shot first. You solve that right fucking now. Do it, baby. So anyway, okay, that's it. Woo, that is it. I hope I answered that question. Again, I love getting to talk Star Wars with people. That's such a fun thing for me. And we got to talk some tech, talk some cryptocurrencies. That's been the bulk of the tech questions lately. Has been all cryptocurrencies. Not that I mind, answering those, particularly on Patreon episodes where they're not going to get used as marketing. But yeah, anyway, feel free to send more of your philosophical questions or your tech questions, whatever you want to do. It's really, this is where you take control, folks. You're the patrons, you're the executive producers, it's all you. So, all right, that's it. Sex and Science Hour. So, like I said, I don't have 100% control over this. The next season is coming. It'll come out when it comes out, and I'll certainly let you know on here when it's going to do that. Got a great episode 230, got a great episode of Sovereign Tech lined up for you there. And I do want to remind everybody, if they haven't done it yet, I do have a new website. It is zog.email. This is the new official website for everything I do that includes Sovereign Tech. SovereignTech.com will still take you to the Patreon page, and I still want to, interact on the Patreon page more than anything. In fact, Patreon had a huge update just today that I'm recording this, and I'm recording this on June 14th, 2017. But anyway, the new website, zog.email, it's in the show notes here. You can go there. You can sign up for the Sovereign Tech newsletter. It's going to start off bi-weekly. It might end up becoming weekly. It might be more. We'll see. But this is a newsletter where I'm just going to share the stuff with you that I can't share in an audio format and whatever else. We're going to get it to you. It's for everybody to get access to, not just patrons. And it's going to be, the newsletter is going to be a fun time. I guarantee you're going to love these things because I have a lot of great stuff in mind. I already have a bunch planned. It's really going to be great. So those will be coming out soon, but you can sign up now for the newsletter. I'm not going to give away your email. I did an episode the other day called Important Announcement where I talked about all this, so I'm not going to rehash it here. But if you want to, jump on, you want more Sovereign Tech in your life, this is how you can do it. Just sign up for the Sovereign Tech newsletter. Like I said, I guarantee you're really, there should be something for everybody in these newsletters. I'm just going to jam pack them with shit. So just kind of me curating the web and how I do it. So you don't have to maybe even go on the web so much. But there we go. So yeah, sign up for that at zog.email. That's it for me. Woo! I will see you on the other side.